Welcome back. You're listening to part 2 of the Journey to Technology, Modernization, and Government, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Rob Shady, the Director of Business Mission in the Program Executive Office for Enterprise Information Systems at the U.S. Army, and Don Sherman, the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Product Marketing at Pega. We spent a lot of time talking about the need for change, the importance of data, the IT modernization journey. And a key piece to that, and I think we kind of have touched upon it, but let's go into a little more detail, is, and Don, you brought this up, this idea of culture change rather than technology. Anyone can write an API. I think, and let's actually start with Rob on this one, I think that's probably one of your biggest challenges, is getting the people in the Army, the service members, and the civilians to march in a different direction, if you will. How are you guys doing that?
Yeah. From an IT modernization and automation standpoint, right, it's about changing culture, impacting the way that we need to focus that culture through modernization. And it's really about understanding the agile methods that we want to move toward. It's about instilling a culture of business agility, and also finding technology experts that can learn and adapt quickly to the new technologies that we want to move to. So finding the right motivation, training, coaching, experience, and expertise is part of our vision in terms of the workforce of the future to move forward through our modernization efforts.
In a lot of ways, this idea of agile methodology, this agility, common themes here, as you're changing the services you're providing, you need help to understand that, and that's the external side. We're going to get to that in a sec. But you also need the people on the internal to think about it differently, and I think that's where the PUEIS has always been kind of at the forefront of thinking differently. Is that because of the culture you have already internally at PUEIS, or is that because of people you hire? Give me a sense of, because it's hard for a lot of agencies.
Right. I think it's been a mix of both. We, like most IT organizations, had a lot of turnover. And being in government, we've had a lot of people retire. So it's giving us an opportunity to fill the ranks with the future modernization sort of requirements and technologies with the skills that we need through the hiring processes. But again, it's providing us that opportunity to really understand how to bring the right skills in and focus on our functional and customer needs and requirements through that right user experience.
Don, jump in here, because the piece that I see a lot of times happen in industry is industry wants to change, bring in this new culture, and the agency goes, whoa, that's a little too fast. Yep. Are you seeing that internal? We're going to talk internal first. Is that internal culture starting to change?
I think it is, and I think partly it's because it has to. I think partly it is also demographic. You know, I think as we bring younger people into the agency and younger people into the workforce, they come with a different view of technology than we have historically had. You know, there's just not a fear of technology in the people coming into the workforce today, right? That was sort of there even 15, 20 years ago. Everybody's a techie.
As a member of Generation X, let me jump in here for a second.
Yeah.
Do you really think, though, that there was a fear back in like when we were younger?
I don't think it was a fear. Yeah. I think it wasn't. So I'll correct myself there, right? But what I think there was there were people who were into computers, and there was everybody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Enough.
I think we've now sort of hit a boundary where everybody carries a computer around with them 24 hours a day, right? So many of the concepts of even how you program is getting baked into something that every child goes through at school or figures out by playing Minecraft and building a world there, right? So there's this emergence of technologies, you know, low code is the latest buzzword, which is really around allowing not programmers to piece together a new business process or a new app, right? That I think fits into that idea of empowering different types of roles in the organization. And I think the technology teams of the future aren't just going to be great programmers. They're going to be people who can sit with one foot in understanding the mission, right? And then figure out how to make that mission come alive through the technology. And that's a different set of skills than we've historically staffed, I think, into IT.
Yeah, I think that's great because, being a Gen Xer too, when I was growing up, I was called a nerd, right? And that wasn't the cool thing to be.
Right.
But in today's world, being a nerd really is the cool thing to be. And that, to me, really is a sounding board for exactly like Don's saying, they're growing up with the technology in their hands. They know how to enable it, and it really impacts, I would say, the training aspects of our mission. So you don't have to spend a tremendous amount of time training in technology because it is much more easily understood, and generational gaps have proven that technology is easily adaptable to, I would say, like the millennial type of generation because they've grown up with it. So a good example in terms of training within the Army, especially on an iPhone, we were showing how to pinch and zoom on a screen. Well, those are inherent things that most people understand and know how to do, so we don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time to focus on that or train in it. So those are kind of the pleasures of growing up with technology.
I have to go off topic for a second. What was your first computer?
My first computer was a Commodore 64.
Yes.
Same here.
There you go, three of them.
Yep.
Well, afterwards, I'll have to tell you a story about my Commodore 64, the best one-on-one Larry Bird, Dr. J game ever. But let's go back to the real discussion here. I think you make a great point of people who grew up with computers and are not afraid, and now there's an inherentness. What does that mean for the external customers too then? I mean, does this also puts more pressure on agencies and organizations?
Well, yeah, as Rob was saying, you've got this new generation that's more facile with technology, but they also expect it to be good.
Yeah.
Like they don't want a really ugly, confusing internal system with hundreds of fields and strange character codes that they can't figure out how to put in. They want it to feel like an app on their phone. So I think there's also this need to bring in skills into this modernization program that we haven't always thought of, like user experience designers who can actually sit and think about not just, hey, does the software functionally work, but is it usable? Is it something that people naturally want to engage with and adopt? And that's a completely different set of skills, I think, that I've traditionally seen, for example, in agency IT.
Rob, talk a little bit about that too, because you have a huge set of people who you have to make happy. You have soldiers in the field who need data, need easy equipment, need to take their iPhones with them that are doing programming in the field.
Right.
And then you have commanders who have other needs, and then you have generals who have other needs. How are you dealing with that user experience piece?
I think it's critical and it's important. And the soldier is at the centerpiece of everything we do is PEO-EIS. And that is kind of hard to balance, not just from a generational standpoint, but from an expectation standpoint. So user experience is everything. And that includes the interactions that those different audiences or
really what you're talking about is as you are developing something and as you're going, okay, well, does this make sense? You need people to test it. You need people to tell you, no, this makes no sense for me. If I'm in the field and you have to push 16 buttons, oh, well, we didn't think about that. Do you have that type of approach that you're getting soldiers in the field, but also people in the base and just a wide variety of people?
Right. I think the expectation in the user experience is about the attitude and the way that a product is going to affect the use. So making sure that it is at a standpoint or user experience perspective that it can be customizable to some extent in terms of what a general officer may want to see versus what the specialist may want to see, and then bridging that gap in between. So having highly customizable applications that can pull in the information that's necessary and relevant to those different groups and perspectives is really important.
And this gets back to something that Don talked about, was the platform.
Yeah.
If you have a standard platform, then everything that sits on top of that platform, the data can be collected and be showed in a dashboard. So maybe Don, talk a little bit about where why that IT modernization perspective fits in with this user-centered experience challenges.
Well, I think a lot of it, comes down to some degree of using that platform as a way of insulating the user from the complexity of the underlying legacy that provides it. I mean, I always almost think of that platform as sort of like a wrapping layer that goes and sits on top so that I can build something that interacts with the user in the way that they want to interact and doesn't force them to understand my legacy in order to figure out how to get something they want to get done, right? And so with these platforms, what we're working with organizations to do is, for example, at Veterans Affairs, we work with how they engage with their vendors and drive payments, right? So how do I make that processing easy so that the vendor that I'm working with wants to come back and continue to do business with us at a good price? Well, that means that I need to build a process that sits on top of all of the legacy billing and ERP and builds an experience built for what that constituent wants.
And I think that's the key here, because you're the customization, everyone gets worried when we talk customization. Well, you don't want to go too far off. But I think if you have that platform, that standard platform, then you're really customizing the skin, right? The outward skin. The internal is all the same. I mean, is that the way you see it, Don?
Yeah, we've found, look, that there are architectural tenets that make sense and make that possible. I think it's really important to separate inside that platform the data layer, right? So how these various APIs feed up into the data that I want to use, from the actual process that I want to drive somebody through, like what are the stages that I need to go through to get a piece of work done, from the way I then turn around and present that to somebody, which may be a mobile app, but it may be a traditional desktop, or it may be an Apple Watch that's got some. So keeping that level of demarcation pretty clear in the architecture becomes important, because that's what allows you to then go and do, okay, I'm going to fix this data stuff under the covers as I do some APIs and consolidation. I'm going to think about the process from the terms of what's the outcome that my constituent's trying to get to, and making it easier and faster for them to get there, like changing their password. And then I think from a design perspective, okay, well, how do I expose that into a mobile app versus how do I expose that onto a traditional web experience?
And one of the things that we're really focused on is making sure that we're not customizing, right? And we want to embrace out-of-the-box technology as much as possible, so we can enable things like mobile through HTML5. And we have a baseline for the way that we're managing and using and governing what we have. So out of the box is really important, especially when it comes to the processes that align with the technology itself.
And mobile is another big piece, Rob, for the Army and really for all agencies. Are you guys starting to kind of make some decisions when it comes to IT modernization? How do you become, if not mobile first, then mobile 1A?
I think mobile is part of our modernization effort. And as an Army, the more that we standardize on technology and the way technology is applied, a good example again is HTML5, the better we'll be able to enable mobile. So the less that we customize, the more that we standardize on what's out there, the better off that will be in terms of the capability for that soldier.
And Don, how much, when you talk to your, customer agencies, is mobile, is that
the huge part of what we're doing, obviously with census, right, where that's a huge part of the experience of sending a couple 100,000 people out into the field to go do the enumeration. One of the interesting things that we've also worked both with census and with other clients on is how to think about mobile in what is still an intermittently connected world, right? Yeah. So, and I think that would probably especially apply, again, to the Army, where you're not always going to have a mobile signal everywhere you go. So how do you build and design apps that operate in some degree of disconnectedness? We've applied architecture, there's a new acronym called OSCO, which is online is a special case of offline. So basically designing the app to run offline and then sync when it gets back online. And to Rob's point, using the out-of-the-box capabilities of these platforms so that you can take advantage of what technologies like HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript frameworks do pretty natively is the right way to approach this.
Gentlemen, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're just about out of time. Before I let you go, when we start talking about the future, in terms of where we're all heading and where customers are heading, where the Army is heading, and maybe Rob, lead us off since you led us off at the very beginning of the conversation. IT modernization is setting the path forward for the Army in many ways. When we have this conversation again in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, where are we going to be from PEO EIS's perspective?
I want to hit on a point that Don made earlier. I think it's the way that we're managing and driving toward the governance of technology. I think that's a really important aspect. It might be almost grassroots or foundational, if you will, but it's those foundational ways that we manage through business that will help us enable the way that we need to consume and use the technologies that are offered to us or available to us. So from a PEO EIS perspective and an Army perspective, it's really about how we govern, how we partner with industry to understand the technologies that are out there, and how we're going to put those technologies in the hands of the soldier to enable the mission.
All right, Don, about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm going to steal what Rob said earlier. I think it's going to be a hybrid world, right? It's going to be hybrid in terms of how we combine new cloud technologies with existing sort of legacy and on-premise. I think we're going to have hybridization of the business side of the mission and IT coming together. This cannot be an IT alone or a business alone kind of thing. And even when we think about things like automation, it's not going to be a world where we're using technology to replace what the people are doing, but it's how do we effectively use technology to empower them and make the constituents, the soldiers, the participants better each and every day.
All right, very good. That's all the time we have for today, so let me thank my guests. Rob Shady, the Director of Business Mission in the Program Executive Office for Enterprise Information Systems at the U.S. Army, and Don Sherman, the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Product Marketing at Pega. You've been listening to part 2 of the Journey to Technology Modernization in Government, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Pega.